Do you know the damage one workplace simp can do to a company?
Now available for the first time in paperback. Stop simping in the workplace. Men, learn what you need to know in order to protect your job from workplace predators with Stop Simping in the Workplace. Available in paperback at online booksellers everywhere.
Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. Last week, Kathleen Kennedy stepped down as head of Lucasfilm. And while many Star Wars and Indiana Jones fans celebrated Kathleen Kennedy stepping down as the leader of Lucasfilm after she basically ran the Star Wars and Indiana Jones properties into the ground, I looked at the whole tragic situation from a different perspective. Now, a lot of people want to sit there and just blame Kathleen Kennedy for running Star Wars and Indiana Jones into the ground by trying to take both of those intellectual properties that were designed to appeal to young boys and try to make them properties for girls. However, the reason why Kathleen Kennedy was allowed to run amok was because Bob Iger was basically one of the worst workplace simps in the history of business. Now, in my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace, I talk about how a man is supposed to operate on the job, and sadly, Bob Iger did not act like the leader he was appointed to be when he was appointed to be the CEO of Disney. Now, Bob Iger originally planned to go out here and buy Lucasfilm in 2012 for $4 billion and Marvel for a similar amount, because what he wanted to do was have male properties that appealed to boys, because Disney's strength at the time was mostly making properties that appealed to girls, like their very popular Disney princesses. And what he wanted to do was go out here and be able to create boy-centered properties for Disney. Unfortunately, what happened at Disney was that Bob Iger didn't take the lead the way a man was supposed to lead, and he basically wound up letting Lucasfilm's staff let him get off his square as related to his focus of his original mission. And what happened was that they decided, instead of staying on focus and staying on the plan that they originally had, which was again to focus on creating new properties that appeal to boys, they decided to go out here and not only appoint Kathleen Kennedy as the new head of Lucasfilm, but also decided to let her take Disney completely off its focus as related to the Lucasfilm properties. Now, that's what a simp does, because what a simp does on the job is he gives passes to females, and as he gives the female a pass, he lets the female do whatever they want on the job. And as he lets the female do whatever they want on the job, what happens is that a company basically is taken completely off course. And as the company is taken completely off course, what happens is that the company basically winds up going into a state of decline. And that's exactly what happened with Lucasfilm and its properties like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. What happened at Disney was that as they appointed Kathleen Kennedy, basically Bob Iger refused to go out here and set boundaries as related to the intellectual properties of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, and he refused to go out and say no to Kathleen Kennedy when she decided to take both of those properties in directions that were completely diametrically opposed to the core audiences that had been established. Now, in the past of the 1980s and the 1970s, Star Wars was always established as a boy brand when George Lucas basically retained the rights to the intellectual properties as related to licensing and merchandising. And he basically, when he went out in 1976, he went to the Mego Corporation looking to sell the license for Star Wars, and when he was turned down by one of the more popular companies, Mego, he then went to the Kenner Corporation, and Kenner bought the license, and ever since Kenner bought the license, Star Wars toys became a household brand and became a part of a pop culture phenomenon. And as Star Wars toys became a pop culture phenomenon for boys, boys basically were the core customer that Kenner was looking for as related to Star Wars, and basically it was boys who went out here and bought Star Wars action figures and Star Wars merchandise after seeing the movie. Most of the Star Wars merchandise basically flew off the shelves, with the exception of Princess Leia back in 1978 or 77. Basically, what happened was Luke and Han and Chewie and the droids basically, and Darth Vader and Obi-Wan sold like hotcakes. However, the only figure that basically languished on store shelves at Toys R Us and many local toy stores and drugstores was Princess Leia. And that's even with Princess Leia being short-packed to possibly one figure per case. Princess Leia basically was one of the poorest selling figures in the Star Wars line. However, that did not stop Kathleen Kennedy from looking to take this brand that had been centered towards boys and basically had appealed toward boys and looked to go on a mission of looking to make this brand appeal more to girls. Now, historically, as related to Star Wars and Indiana Jones, both of these brands were very popular with boys in the late 1970s and late 1980s, and they were still retaining their popularity in the mid-1990s with the Power of the Force 2 line. And again, the main focus was on the male heroes of Luke and Han and many other characters like the droids and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And as we got into Star Wars Episode 1 in 1999, the focus again was on male characters like young Anakin Skywalker, who was made into a 6-year-old boy to appeal to young boys, and other younger characters like Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul. So Star Wars has always been a brand focused primarily on boys, and its main focus was always on a male-centered audience. However, for this sequel trilogy, Kathleen Kennedy decided to talk about the identity politics of diversity and sadly looked to take the Star Wars brand on a course to try to course correct it, even though Bob Iger's original plan was to try to find properties for Disney that would appeal to boys. And again, this is where Bob Iger basically lost his ability to lead because, again, a strong man, when he has a mission, he basically stays on course as related to his mission, and he doesn't let anybody take him off his square. No, because he knows his position as a leader and an authority figure, he sets boundaries for people, and he doesn't hesitate to say no if something takes him off his mission. And sadly, that didn't happen with Bob Iger, the head of Disney. No, what happened with Bob Iger is basically he started simping for Kathleen Kennedy, and as he started simping for Kathleen Kennedy, what happened was she was allowed to take Star Wars completely off its course and take Disney completely off its course as related to its original mission, which was again to create intellectual properties that would appeal to boys and male audiences. And this is what happens when you put a simp in the workplace. A simp in the workplace is a man who is a weak leader, and that weak leader, what he does is he winds up being taken completely off focus because a female wants to do what she wants to do, and basically because this man doesn't have the backbone or the stones or the courage to say no and let them know that the core focus is supposed to be on what you originally planned. What he does is look to give a woman a pass, and as he looks to give a woman a pass, it basically puts a whole business in jeopardy, and that's exactly what happened over at Lucasfilm. Bob Iger, the man who was in charge, did not go out of his way to check Kathleen Kennedy and did not go out of his way to let this woman know what her place was in the business as related to Disney's overall mission. Again, Disney's original mission, I'll repeat it once more. They bought Lucasfilm and Marvel because they had no intellectual properties that appealed to boys, that they thought, even though they did have one intellectual property that was very popular in the 1990s that did appeal to boys, and that was Disney's Gargoyles, created by Greg Weisman. Gargoyles was a very popular line among boys and even some young girls who were fans of the show. And Disney didn't go out here and build on that type of audience because they saw the audience for Disney princesses being a bit more profitable than the burgeoning market as related to Gargoyles. But Gargoyles basically showed that Disney could create properties for boys if they remained focused and dedicated to their mission. Gargoyles showed that they could do this in-house, but Bob Iger didn't want to take the time to create intellectual properties in-house, and he didn't want to go out to creators like myself who have intellectual properties that are male-centered, like my John Haynes series. No, didn't want to go out here and look to appeal to the people who could create new properties for companies like Disney. No, what they did was he would go out here and he would buy intellectual properties, but the sad part is, as he bought those intellectual properties, he did not lead as related to those intellectual properties, and because he did not lead like a man and let women basically take complete control over his business, that's why Disney's business is struggling right now, and that's one of the core reasons why Disney Star Wars basically went into decline. Now, the writing was on the wall for Disney after the whole plan for The Force Awakens. Originally, I think the original plan was to have a stormtrooper go on the road to becoming a Jedi. Unfortunately, Kathleen Kennedy scuttled those plans so that she could put her self-insert Mary Sue character Rey and make her the focus of that series of movies. And because no man had the backbone or the stones to check this woman, Bob Iger didn't have the backbone or the stones to check that woman, and as a result, the whole focus of the sequel trilogy went over to Rey, even though historically it was shown that female characters never did well in the entire Star Wars line. I mean, historically, when you look at the Star Wars line, Princess Leia has been a peg warmer for ever since the late 1970s, and she's been warming pegs because boys basically don't want to have girls as related to their toy line, and the few that do are usually, again, completists who basically need a female character to complete things, and even now, basically most collectors, again, only buy the female characters basically to complete a collection so that they can have all the figures. So the facts were in place in front of Bob Iger as related to the overall pattern of male behavior. Unfortunately, when you're a workplace simp, you don't look at the facts of a situation. You don't look at the history as related to the demographics, as related to business. No, when a simp is out here, the only thing he looks at is the crystal blue eyes of a female and the curves of her body, and he's looking to gain favor with that female. Again, it's all part of the gynocentric way he is raised. All part of the gynocentric way he is raised. He basically looks to, again, appeal to the women and looks to, again, gain their favor. He looks to gain their favor, and he doesn't want to make them upset. And in many cases, he's afraid of shaming language, like being called sexist, like being called unfair. But the facts are clearly there as related to Lucasfilm and the popularity of its intellectual properties, like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. When it came down to Star Wars and Indiana Jones as related to film and related to licensing and merchandising, basically both of those properties made most of their money on male audiences, and the male audiences just aren't interested in one seeing the male figures basically being completely emasculated and put into secondary roles the way Finn and Poe Dameron were, and two, many of those males basically don't want to see a woman made into an infallible Mary Sue character who doesn't go on a hero's journey. So when it came down to this Kathleen Kennedy, her whole plan to try to make the Force female was destined to fail. It was destined to fail when you look at the overall history of how Star Wars became a cultural phenomenon and what led to Star Wars becoming a cultural phenomenon. And she basically, again, was allowed to do this not because of her just being in charge, but because the men who were overall in charge of Disney, like Bob Iger, again, were a bunch of simps who did not have the backbone or the stones to go out here and set boundaries for Kathleen Kennedy to insist that she continue to follow the mission that Bob Iger originally planned, which was to create properties to appeal to boys. And three, he didn't go out and again reinforce those boundaries by doing what a man does, and that is saying no to a woman, and saying no to a woman to again maintain the standards of the business. That's what a man has to do when he's on the job. When a man is on the job, he has to again not only create the mission for the business, but he has to maintain a certain level of standards. And if he knows his core audience is male, then he knows that, okay, I have to make these properties that are made for male audiences stay on the mission that I originally had, and not let somebody take me off my course. Because with simps and beta males, what they do all the time is let a woman take them off course, and as they let that woman take them off course, she gains power, and as she gains power in the relationship, she basically, again, as she's doing what she pleases, she goes out and actively expresses contempt for those men, and shows no regard for them as she continues to go on her course that basically takes the business into decline. And that's exactly what happened over at Lucasfilm. What happened over at Lucasfilm is that because simps like Bob Iger basically let a woman take them off course, basically Star Wars and Indiana Jones basically went from being billion-dollar intellectual properties to basically being less worth than a $5 food stamp without the book. And that's because these men didn't have, again, the backbone or the stones to let this woman know, hey, we put you in this position. We put you in this position to focus on developing products for the male audience. And we have historical, factual documents that basically show that these properties are not meant for females. And again, we're not looking to appeal to females as related to anything, because females have not ever been interested in Star Wars whatsoever. No, when it comes down to females want a completely different type of story. They want a romance. They want a man to sweep them off their feet. They're not interested in so-called girl power, and most girls, again, were not interested in Star Wars whatsoever. Even though Kathleen Kennedy insisted on going on this course, Star Wars was always a boys' toy line and was always targeted toward boys until Kathleen Kennedy came along, and her plans to make Star Wars focus on females is the core reason why The Force Awakens, again, failed, and the sequel trilogy failed, because boys, again, don't want to don't want to watch a female be the lead in their stories, especially little boys, because Star Wars was meant to appeal to 10, 12, 13-year-old boys, and a lot of them were not interested in seeing a girl be the leader over them. And again, this is why many of the Star Wars merchandise languished on store shelves, like Rey figures and Rose Tico figures. Basically, all of these figures, they made them in larger numbers, not understanding the history of the failure of Princess Leia at retail, but they insisted, hey, girls would definitely like this. And again, because they insisted on this, and the Simps did not set a boundary, this is why Ollie's is basically filled with Star Wars merchandise to this day, some of it dating back as far as 2016, because no man had the backbone or the stones to let Kathleen Kennedy know what the business was, and because none of these people in entertainment had any sort of backbone or stones, that's why Star Wars has crumbled and completely collapsed. And what's really sad about this whole situation is that as Star Wars has gone into complete decline, what has happened is that Kathleen Kennedy was never held accountable whatsoever for anything that she did. She was the one who made the decision to take Star Wars and Indiana Jones and focus on the people being lead characters being female. She was the one who basically, I believe, came in and made her own self-insert character of Rey, and the character on Indiana Jones in the Dial of Destiny that was done by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and created not only a complete collapse of the Star Wars franchise, but gave us one of the greatest flops in history in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, not to mention the debacle that was Willow. And again, this woman did all this, and sadly, the reason why she was allowed to do all of this is because a man, Bob Iger, again, did not have the backbone or the stones to check this woman. He did not say no to her. He did not set boundaries for her and let her know, hey, we're looking to appeal to boys. My goal and my mission is to appeal to boys with these properties. No, didn't set boundaries, and that's what happens with workplace simps. Again, these men get knocked off their square. They get knocked off their square on the job. They'll be in a job and basically, again, be working towards their own goals, but they see a female, and it don't even have to be a beautiful female. It could be an average at best looking female, and they go out here and look to follow her plan and not follow the plan that they had. And basically, they wind up with their lives derailed. And as they wind up with their lives derailed, is that what happens is that most of those women, when they see that everything's a complete mess as related to the business, they wind up leaving that business and leave that man holding the bag as the business goes into decline, and in many cases goes completely out of business. And that's what happened here with Kathleen Kennedy. She knows that the intellectual properties of Star Wars, Willow, and Indiana Jones are not, their value has basically dropped to food stamp levels, and now that she knows that there's no way she can be able to make a living on those intellectual properties anymore that were owned by men, she's now getting ready to leave after years of failure. I mean, any other person in Hollywood, I know from studying this business for over 25 years, if you had one failure, you would basically be out the door. Usually when a person has maybe one flop or two flops, usually if you have 1 to 3 flops, you're basically out the door. But this woman stayed on at Lucasfilm for, I believe, 7 to 10 years, and after a string of failures and a complete collapse of the company, she managed to remain in this job, I believe, 1, due to her white female privilege, 2, due to gynocentrism from Simps enabling her, And her basically, again, being in this company led to this entire company, again, going into this complete state of decline. And she was allowed to continue to remain in this company even after numerous bad decisions. When if Kathleen Kennedy was a male and she had one flop or three flops, basically, they would have again shown her the door. They would have shown her at the door with the start of the decline of the Last Jedi and the complete mess that was Solo, and basically the complete collapse of things like the Willow property. The Willow property, basically, they had to take it completely off and make it a tax write-off because it was a complete disaster all around, because again, Kathleen Kennedy put in all of this identity politics that ran counter to this children's property. One of the reasons why people turned away from Willow is because they put all of these things in Willow as related to sex. And again, conservative American families don't want to see anything that's sex related in their children's shows. And that was one of the reasons why Willow was a big flop, was you were talking about this alphabet stuff. And again, American families are not comfortable putting their children in front of anything sexual. So basically this woman was again destroying these intellectual properties, and was given a pass to do this by the man in charge, Bob Iger. Bob Iger basically is the reason why Disney Star Wars was the mess that it was, because he wound up being taken off course. He wound up being taken off course as related to his original plan. Again, when you're a man out here, the one thing you have to understand is that you have to stay on course when you have goals. You have to stay focused when you have goals. And the right woman will be with you, focused on helping you towards your goals. But when a woman can take you off your goals, it really says something about you as a man. It says that your character is not strong, and it says that you basically don't have a strong resolve, because nobody should take you off your course. No, when you're a man out here, you have to understand, if you have goals, you have to stay focused on your goals. You have to stay focused on your mission. And that's one of the lessons a lot of men are not picking up as related to the complete collapse of Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Willow. The complete collapse of these Lucasfilm properties is due to a simp not understanding about staying on his square and staying focused on his mission and focused on accomplishing the goals of his mission, because a man has to again stay focused if he wants to achieve anything. And again, we could, if there was a man who was focused on his purpose, we possibly could have got a great Star Wars sequel trilogy if there was a man to sit there and say, hey, where's George Lucas? He wants to sell me this property. The first thing I want to do is find out his plans for that sequel trilogy, because George Lucas originally planned 9 episodes of Star Wars, and I want to help fulfill the mission of completing that goal. That's what I would want to do if I was a Hollywood executive in Bob Iger's position and I had bought Lucasfilm. My goal would have been to make episodes 7, 8, and 9 and go out here and let Luke, Han, and Leia basically go out on one last mission. As they were. Again, Luke would be the head of the Jedi, Han Solo would be the head of the New Republic, and Princess Leia would be a head of something. And again, all three of them and Chewie and the droids would come together for one final mission, and they would be, again, as they were going on that mission, joining up with these newer characters like the Stormtrooper who would become a Jedi, because when the Empire fell, what would happen is that you would still have guys who were, again, out here doing jobs as stormtroopers, because, yeah, the Empire is gone, but there would be remnants of it. And as this guy who's a stormtrooper would be, he would be on the road to being a Jedi. Again, this would take the Star Wars franchise full circle, but sadly, I don't have a job at Lucasfilm to basically, again, try to get this whole thing back on course. But my course would have been focused on the boys who made Star Wars, again, a billion-dollar franchise, because I know historically for a fact, again, girls never played with Star Wars, don't care about Star Wars, and in the case of Indiana Jones, basically, again, would be focused on his son as related to the stories, or focused on another actor taking over the role. I mean, that's what a man who's focused on and on his square would have done, but sadly Bob Iger wasn't focused and on his square. No, this guy basically, again, went out here and became a workplace simp. And again, workplace simps, when they come into business, they're not fit for leadership. And when you put them in leadership positions, what happens is that they wind up creating chaos, because instead of them running the business is running them. That's something I learned from Chef Gordon Ramsay in Hell's Kitchen Season 3 as he was counseling the winner, Rock. And he basically told Rock that either you run the kitchen or the kitchen runs you. And sadly, what happens with Lucasfilm and Disney overall is that Bob Iger no longer is running the kitchen is running him. And the employees are basically are inmates in an asylum who have basically made the Disney from a place that was for families and children to a place focused on social justice and identity politics, and not about creating quality entertainment for families and children. Again, Disney can make boys' properties very well. That was shown in 1994 with the Gargoyles line, and Disney could have gone on to have that type of success if they persevered. Unfortunately, many workplace simps like Bob Iger want to take shortcuts like buying companies like Lucasfilm and Marvel without understanding the underpinnings of those businesses or understanding the core missions that they have. And that's why Disney is completely off the rails at this point, because when you put a workplace simp in a business, basically they take that business from profitability all the way to a place where it's basically not worth a $5 food stamp without the book. Now, if you want to check out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on lulu.com for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to learn more about workplace simps and the destruction they can cause on the job, and also learn how to identify female and male predators in the workplace that can take you off your square and derail your career, you can pick up my book, Stop Simping in the Workplace, on Amazon.com to learn to identify the behavior of these type of workplace predators and keep your career focused and keep you focused on your goals. And if you also want to check out much of the fantasy fiction you see ads for in the SJS Direct universe, you can find those books on Amazon.com as well, along with Stop Simping in the Workplace, and books like the ISIS series and the Esteem series and the John Haynes series. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business at paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today.
Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.